Welcome. It's lovely having you join us, and we'll start, of course, with a bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And I'm going to go to the screen share, and here we go. And give me one moment because I just do a little bit of housekeeping there. All right, so let's go back here. So, of course, the context, of course, is that God is giving, it's certainly inspiring Moses to speak to the people. And at this moment, as we're coming to the close of the book of Deuteronomy, and these are all given on Moses' last day of his life, we're coming to the end of his last speech. And the Parsha Hazinu, there's such concern that the Israelites are not going to be loyal. That is a real concern, and of course, it's a prophecy that sadly is fulfilled. At any rate, Moses is doing everything he can to warn them about it and to try and prevent this from happening. At any rate, he is talking about the fact now that they had seen these idols that from the nations they passed through, and he's warning about the fact that there may be people amongst them who are attracted to this form of worship. So here we go. Pen yesh bachem, lest there is among you ish or isha, a man or a woman, or mishpacha, or a family, or shevet, or a tribe, asher levavo poneh hayom, whose heart turns away today, me'im Hashem Elokeinu, from the Lord our God, lalechet la'avod, to go and to serve, et Elohei ha'algoyim hahem, the gods of those nations, pen yesh bachem shorish porei rosh v'la'ana. This is a difficult text here to translate, but it says, lest there is among you a root that is sprouting poison, gold, sometimes it's translated as, and wormwood. And all right, so let's take a look at the Rashi here. And of course, this clearly is a metaphor. So before we look at the Rashi, we'll go to an earlier source, which is Onkelos, the Aramaic translation. And this is how he translates it into Aramaic, because he actually interprets this metaphor here directly. And he says, Dilma, in Aramaic that means perhaps, it bachon, there is bachon amongst you, gavar, a man, maharher, who is contemplating, chitin, sins, this chitin, like chet, right, that's the Hebrew word, which means not a deliberate, an unintentional sin. And I need to clarify what we mean by unintentional. Unintentional means that you don't know it's a sin. You're unaware of it, and therefore when you do it, you don't know it's a sin, and is therefore considered unintentional. Now, that doesn't get you off the hook, because if you tell if you're driving, 15 miles over the speed limit, and the cop stops you, and you say to the cop, I didn't realize I was going 15 miles over the speed limit, that is not going to get you off having to pay a ticket. In fact, there's even a possibility you might lose your license. And maybe not so much over speeding, but if you go through a red light and you say to the cop, I didn't know you were supposed to stop at a red light, okay, then you're going to lose your license. So even though you may claim that you didn't know, and maybe you really didn't know, then you shouldn't be driving. So unintentional sins aren't excuses. Now, there's a difference between unintentional sins or zadon, and a zadon is an intentional sin, right? In other words, you know it's wrong and you still do it. Now, there's a third level of sin, which is doing it just to sort of get at God, just to try and show God who's boss. So you know it's wrong, but you do it with malicious intent, because it's possible that you can do it even though you know it's wrong, but it's more out of laziness or just not caring enough, etc. So again, you look at how, because sinning is something important, and that's why we deconstruct it to that extent and don't just sort of talk about sins, but we make distinctions like that. And we know that, right, that knowledge is deconstruction. That's the more you know about something, the more you're capable of deconstructing it. So that's how Onkelos interprets this, and of course he is reflecting the rabbinic understanding, and that's why I put compare Onkelos right here, and Rashi will later talk about this too. But let's go back into the Rashi. Okay, so pen yesh bachem, lest there is among you, lefichach ani tzarich lehashbi'achem. And for this reason, lefichach, for this reason, I am compelled to forswear you. So from shvu'ah, meaning an oath, right? So I believe I'm using English correctly there. Going on, pen yesh bachem, lest there is among you, and again he explains this word pen, right? And he says shema, lest, perhaps. That's what the shema means. Asher levavo poneh hayom, whose heart turns today, melakabel alav habrit, from accepting upon himself the covenant. So it's not that we have a choice in this, all right? Because, and part, I think the reason of this has been suggested to us by Rashi in yesterday's lesson, which is that God has committed himself to giving us the land of Israel, of blessing us, etc., has made that commitment. And it's not a conditional commitment, because he made that promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so if we don't uphold our end of the deal, right, God is still sort of, now he's unable to fulfill it, maybe one thing, or to the degree that he now, though, is under that obligation, but incapable of fulfilling it because of what we have done. He has to break the deal, right? It's just how we feel when we make a deal with somebody and then they break the deal, and so we have to call the deal off. It's not something that we particularly want to do, and it may, in fact, be quite upsetting. And so that's sort of the dynamic that's going on here, and Rashi explains it in that way. How when we don't fulfill our side of the bargain, we go beyond just not fulfilling our side of the bargain. It's a very serious thing. So, all right. Shoresh, there we go. Shoresh pore rosh v'la'ana, right? A root that sprouts a gall and wormwood. So he explains this in the literal sense in the Hebrew. He tries to explain the Hebrew itself. Shoresh, that's a root. Megadel, that grows. Esev mar, a bitter herb. Kegidin, that is as bitter as sinews. Shehem marim, which are bitter, right? So the word mar means bitter. Klomar, that is to say, mifare umarbe, so he explains it in this way, who causes to grow and to multiply, marbe, right? Resha, wickedness, bekir bechem, in your midst. So again, Moses is putting it very clearly, and we've said this now a number of times, just how we tend to make little of wickedness by sort of saying things like, well, everybody does it, or it's not that big a deal, or, in other words, we try to take away the level of concern we should have about these particular things. And, if I'm allowed to say this, sadly it seems like there's a multiplicity of this kind of stuff happening on all kinds of levels in today's world, which is just heartbreaking. Onwards. It's great stuff that we're reading. V'haya, and it shall be, b'shom'o et divrei ha'Allah hazot, that when he hears the words of this curse, v'hitbarech belvavo, that he will bless himself in his heart, v'omar, to say, shalom yihyeli, I will have peace. I won't have a problem, right? No problem here. Ki bishri rutli bi elech, because even though, perhaps is what the word ki means here, or maybe it means despite, right? But I think it means, although, perhaps. Bishrirut li bi elech, I will follow, I will go in the imaginings of my heart, okay? Lema'an svot harava, in order to add harava et hatzme'ah, the quenched to the thirsty. And again, a second time today that we're coming across metaphoric use of language that is quite hard to understand, right? It's somewhat opaque. But again, onkelos, back here, again, bedil means, so this last little part, onkelos, interpreting for us. Bedil, in order that, le'osafa le, to add to it, chet'e shalvata, that is unintentional sins, al zdanota, on intentional sins. So, in other words, that there will be consequences that, while, of course, unintentional sins do not bear the same kind of consequences as intentional sins, and to a point where if you do tshuva, they may in fact be totally absolved, right? But here, they all get counted together because of this intentionality that gets deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And so now everything starts to get counted. And in fact, Maimonides has a section called Hilchot Tshuva, the laws of Tshuva, in his incredible work, his encyclopedic work on Halacha, the Mishneh Torah. It's a beautiful section. You can find it translated, and at this time of the year, it's certainly worth reading. And he talks about how the first and second time you may, if you do it unintentionally, you may get completely off the hook, and then the third time it starts to count. That God gives us credit because in terms of our turning away and our lacking loyalty and to God's law and things like that there's a certain, how would I put it? Trying to think of it, where it doesn't count for the first two times. All right, let's go into, and then I have about another 5 minutes. All right. V'hit barech bilvavo, and he will bless himself, bless in his heart. He will bless himself in his heart. And he says, Lashon bracha, this of course is, connotes blessing. Bracha yachshov belibo, he will think of himself as being blessed. Birkat shalom la'atzmi, I'm going to be just fine. I'm not going to have any problem at all. Lemor, this is to say, lo yevo oni klalot halalu, I'm not going to have to face the consequences of these sins, that is, these curses that were mentioned in Kitavo. They're not going to come upon me. It's not going to happen. Ach shalom yela, it's all going to be fine. I'm going to be fine. So he now gives a little bit of grammatical, right, translation, v'hit barech. So the word v'hit barech, it's considered a form of a verb that's called hitpa'el, and that is a reflexive form. We've talked about this a little bit. We talked about the causative form of the verb, and here we're talking about the reflexive form of the verb, and here we go. And look, I can actually make out the French here. Menedir soi. Bless, right, yourself, belaz in a foreign language. And this edition of Rashi adds the Yiddish, wird sich segnen, will bless himself. And here he gives examples of other verbs that are reflexive, right? So you've got the word galach, which means to shave something. The hit galech means to shave yourself. V'hit palel, which interestingly enough, means to pray, but it gives us a deep insight as to what prayer is from a Hebrew etymological sense. The word palel and plilim means to judge. So vehit palel means to judge yourself. So we consider the act of prayer in a way, and if you look carefully at and try to sort of stand back from so many of these words, you realize in the prayer book, in the Siddur, that they have to do with values. And so what we're doing is we're judging ourselves as we look at these prayers and stuff like that. I think I'm going to stop here. I'm going to put in the marking. We may not be able to meet tomorrow, unfortunately, at all. But if I can, let's assume we will meet, and I will let you know if I'm unable to do it. I'm surprised I'm not getting a... Normally I will... It's not showing the arrow here. All right, I will just have to remember where it is. So I'm going to stop the recording and stop the share. Stop the recording.